Welcome back to Don't Forget the Champagne. I'm Nichelle, and this is Wedding Planning 101. Today, we are going to be talking about save the dates and invitations. So the papers we send in the mail to invite people to come to our wedding. So we're just going to be talking about the very basics. There is a lot that can go into invitations and save the dates, but we're just going to be talking about like the 101, the basics. Okay, let's get into it. First, let's chat about save the dates. First of all, what is a save the date? So a save the date is a card, normally, that you send out typically 6 to 9 months before your wedding date. And its only purpose is so people can write your wedding on the calendar and don't schedule a trip to Disneyland the same weekend. The only things you need to include on your save the dates, that are must-haves, are your wedding date and the location. And by location, I mean the town that you're getting married in. I think it's also really helpful to include your wedding website if you already have one up and running, which you probably should at this point, but you don't have to. Those two pieces of information, the date and the location, are the only must-haves. If you do already have your wedding website up, which I think is a great idea to have if you have the time to do so, the two most important things to have ready to go on your wedding website are your wedding registry, so links to wherever you're registered, and you don't have to have a full registry put together yet, but if you have some items, people will want to start purchasing them, especially if you're having engagement parties, bridal showers, those sorts of things as preliminary events to your wedding. People will want to know what you want. And the other thing is to put your hotels up there as soon as you can so people can start making travel arrangements, especially if you have a lot of guests coming in from out of town. Like I mentioned, typically save the dates are sent 6 to 9 months before the wedding, but I think they can be sent up to a year before, and maybe even a little longer if you're doing a destination wedding. I typically don't like to go longer than a year just because people won't have their calendar. I don't know what I'm doing in 18 months. A year, someone will have their calendar ready to go for that typically. Visually, your save the date doesn't need to match anything going on with your wedding. It can be a pretty separate thing. At this point, you might not even have your full wedding style nailed down because it's 9 months away from your wedding date. And that's totally fine. Most of the time, what we've been seeing recently is save the dates are a great opportunity to use an engagement photo or two. And then, like I said, just some simple wording to explain where and when your wedding is happening. I love doing the photo postcards, one, because they are nice to put on the fridge, and two, because you can save on postage, because you don't have to, you just are mailing a postcard. You can use postcard stamps, which are the cheapest stamp you can get. It is ideal. Do remember as you're ordering save the dates that you only need one save the date per household, not per guest. So if you're inviting a lot of couples or a lot of families, you're going to need less save the dates. Typically, general rule of thumb is about 60 to 70% of your guest list number. So if you're inviting 100 people, you only need 60 to 70 save the dates. But often you can even do a little less than that. Do kind of take a look at your guest list and make sure you're ordering for the houses you're sending the save the dates to instead of the people. Also with save the dates, I think this is an important note. Anyone you send a save the date to is essentially invited to your wedding. So unless there's something obviously with Corona, we've been having a lot of people who've had to cut guest list drastically, but typically if you send a save the date, you are going to be expected to invite them to a wedding. So don't send your save the dates until your guest list is finalized. I also think save the dates, it's a great time to use pre-printed address labels, whether you do them as labels or a lot of companies like Minted and things will pre-address them before they mail them to you. There's mixed thoughts on this. People are you should hand address everything, but I think with save the dates, they're typically pretty informal, and I don't feel like there's a reason that you would need to handwrite them. Unless you want to, then you do you, boo. Not for me though. There's gonna be plenty of times to handwrite things. Don't you worry, we're almost at invitations. But for now, I think just do the pre-printed. Save yourself some heartache and some carpal tunnel. Okay, let's talk invitations now. So the first thing I want to talk about with invitations is when do we send them? So typically you're looking at about 8 weeks before the wedding. And how I think you should figure out when you should send your invitations is kind of reverse engineer the process. So start with your wedding date. So the day you're getting married, and then typically 1 to 2 weeks before that, your final numbers are due to your catering team, to your bakery, to your venue, to a lot of people. So 1 to 2 weeks before your wedding date, you've got your final numbers due. And then a week before that, your invitation or your And the week before that, your RSVPs should be due, because that gives you a week to yell at some people, track down some RSVPs. And then you want to give people like 4 weeks before your RSVPs are due to send the invitations. So 4 to 6 weeks before that, I like to say. Send your invitations so people have time to RSVP, so you have to yell at less people. So when you get your final numbers to give to your wedding day people. Yeah, you feeling me? But yeah, typically right around 8 weeks before your wedding day is where all that math adds up to. What goes on then? Let's talk about what goes on in your invitation. It depends a ton on the formality of your invitation. Your invitation is going to set the tone for your wedding day. So if you were having a black tie wedding, a great way to indicate that, besides writing black tie on your invitation, is to have a very formal invitation. If you were having a wedding where people can dress super casually and you have very, very formal invitations, it's going to kind of confuse people. So your invitation overall kind of formality should correlate. It doesn't need to perfectly match, but should correlate to your wedding day. I'm going to walk you through, with some notes, the traditional invitation structure. So the first thing you're going to find on an invitation is like the request line or the like welcome. This is like together with their families, or Mr. and Mrs. Bride's mom and dad, Mr. and Mrs. Bride's mom and dad, Mr. and Mrs. Groom's mom and dad. There's a lot of different wordings depending on who's paying for things. Divorced parents, your parents aren't involved at all. There's a lot of options there with that, but it's like someone is requesting this person that you're sending the invitation to, their presence at a wedding. Second thing that happens is you tell them whose wedding it is. So you're going to want the full name of the bride and the full name of the groom on the invitation next. And don't, even if the bride is changing her last name or vice versa, both of them will have like their maiden names, because you're not married yet. Don't be switching your last names yet. Then you're going to want to put the date and the time of the wedding. If you're doing a very fancy invitation, there should be no numerals. Like, you're going to have to write out the year 2020. If you're doing a less formal invitation, then write those 2s and 0s with vigor. Next thing you want is the ceremony location. If your ceremony and reception are in different places, the traditional format would be to just put the ceremony location on your invitation and to include the reception as a separate insert. However, you do you. If you want to put your reception on there as well, great. And then I think it's really important, although this is optional, I think it can be really helpful for guests to include a dress code, and make sure your dress code is simple. The more complicated your dress code is, the more people will hate you. It's just the rules. I don't make them, I'm just telling you them. So that is everything that goes on the main page of your invitation. So next up is going to come the insert. So those are all the other little things that should go in the envelope. So the first thing is your RSVP card. This is pretty much a must-have. You have two options with an RSVP card, a traditional RSVP or a digital one. Both of them require an insert. The digital one, which we've been seeing a little bit more and more, but honestly, like, it's a little less expensive for you most of the time because you don't have to pay for postage for them to send their RSVP cards back. I haven't found people respond to electronic RSVPs any more regularly than they do like a paper one. I don't know why people find RSVPs so hard, but they do. So within your RSVP card, if you're doing a traditional, so if you're doing an electronic one, you just need a card that says where they RSVP. I think password protecting your RSVP is crucial, and yeah, give them a little note. If you're doing a traditional paper RSVP card, you need the RSVP card and you need pre-addressed stamped envelopes. So your envelope should have your address, like you as the couple, your address that you want the RSVPs to come back to, so you can write down if they're coming or not. And it should be pre-stamped. You don't want them, it's expected that you provide the stamp for that. I know, annoying, but true. The actual RSVP card itself, you're going to have a line for names. If you are very worried that people are going to start writing down randoms and you're not giving out a lot of +1, you can fill that in for them. And then a lot of times it'll say, especially if you're doing bigger parties, it'll say like, it'll have like a seats out of blank line. I'll show you a picture. And you can write in the number. This is another way to prevent people from adding extra +1 or bringing children or those sorts of things. I think also including a no children line if you are not including children on your RSVP card is a great idea. Also, it should be prominently displayed on your wedding website. I don't know if I mentioned that, but important. Another thing that should be on your RSVP card is a meal preference spot if you were doing a plated dinner. If you are not doing a plated dinner, then you don't need to worry about this. Sometimes if you're doing a buffet, you can put allergies, because that can be helpful, but also sometimes people use allergies as a place to write down like the fact they don't like pineapple. Okay, Pam, no one cares. We're having Hawaiian food, everything has pineapple in it. I actually really hate pineapple. I'd be sad if that were the case. Besides an RSVP card, there are a few other inserts that you might need depending on your wedding. So another one that you could have is an accommodations one if you have a hotel room block that you want people to book at, or if you are like renting a big cabin for a bunch of people to stay at, those sorts of things. If accommodations, you want them to do a specific thing, or you have a suggestion of what they should be doing, and including an accommodations insert can be helpful. Another thing you can include is a map of wherever you're at. I think maps are really cute. I think they're kind of over, which is sad. I really loved the like 2015 map craze where people like did like beautiful watercolored maps of their cities, but I haven't been seeing those as much, which is makes me sad. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have your reception at a separate place in your ceremony, traditionally you'd include that in a reception card, not on your main invitation. But I think that is a little less followed than these other traditions. And then if you have a wedding website, I think it's a great idea to have a website insert card so people can find that. You can also combine some of these cards together. They don't all need to be separate. Again, it depends on the formality of your invitation, yada, yada, yada. Okay, someone called me, interrupted my flow. That's all right. Visually, I think it's important that your invitation matches the tone of your wedding. It doesn't need to perfectly match the aesthetics of your wedding. You don't need to have the wedding colors. I think it's great if you want to, but it doesn't need to. But like I mentioned earlier, the formality should be pretty cohesive, just so people know what's happening. I also would visually, if you're doing a fancier invitation, really consider postage pretty strongly. Especially if you're having like beautifully calligraphied envelopes, having just like an American flag stamp can really make things sad. I know it's silly. Invitations are silly, okay? I love invitations so much. Like flowers and invitations are my favorite part of a wedding day. But yeah, you do have to remember they will be thrown away. So the amount of effort you're putting in is like really solely for you. Like maybe your mom and maybe your cousin who will like appreciate it. But just be like okay with the fact that like you want vintage looking postage or like custom stamps with you and your fiance's face on them. That is all something you can do, but you do need to look ahead of time if you want custom or pretty postage. Again, it's really important to remember that you only need one invitation per household, not per guest invited. And like we mentioned, did we mention this? No, this is another video I filmed. Your envelope should be addressed to everyone who's invited. So if you were inviting person and their spouse, it should be to person and their spouse on the envelope. If you were inviting the whole family, it should say like the family of blah blah blah. Or you can list all their names out depending on how big their family is. When it comes to addressing invitations, there are a lot more rules, regulations, suggestions, considerations. So traditionally, wedding invitations are handwritten invitation part. There are amazing calligraphers that will do your invitations for you, address them all for you. They look beautiful. It is expensive. You're paying like $1-ish. A card is pretty typical, which can add up pretty quickly, and also $1 a card, like it can go up from there. I think it's worth it because I think it's so pretty, but like you don't have to think it's worth it. You can also handwrite your own invitations if you have pretty handwriting, or even if you don't. Like, again, there'll be like 3 people that care about it. If you're one of those people, then make it a priority. If you're not, then don't. You can also get them pre-printed. A lot of places like Minted and things will do pre-printed envelopes for you, or you can print address labels. I would say if you are going to do pre-printed address labels, go with clear invitations or clear labels instead of white ones. They just tend to look a little bit prettier, and that way if you get a pretty envelope, you're not ruining it with a white label. Fun fact. If you are doing beautifully calligraphied invitations, or you have really beautiful vintage postage or anything like that, make sure when you mail them, you go into the post office and you do what's called hand canceling them. That's where instead of running them through the machine that sorts them, you do it yourself. It's a pain in the butt, but it will prevent them from getting damaged. They are still going through the mail. They're not going to end up pristine at the location. They're not going to look like what they look like at your house when they get there. That is okay. You just have to let that go. Unless you're going to hand deliver them all yourself, which then you don't have to pay for postage. You do have to run around all over town delivering envelopes, so you got to figure it out. a quick note that I wanted to say about invitations is to make sure to save a couple. I would recommend saving at least 2 full invitation suites. For one, I love putting together an invitation in like a shadow box for like a memento of your wedding day. And 2, you are going to want that detailed shot on your wedding day. So put it aside for your photographer. They'll take some cute pics with your invitations and your rings and stuff like that. So you're going to want to have some pulled aside and like kept in like mint condition so that they can be photographed and displayed. Yes? Yes. Okay, I think that is all I have when it comes to invitations and save the dates. Like I said, this is just the basics. We could get into a lot more depth about like wording and etiquette and how to specify certain things. But this is just like the basics of invitations. I think they're really important. I think sometimes people undervalue them, but also like they will end up in the trash can. So you gotta figure out where you fall on that spectrum. If you have any questions for me about wedding invitations or anything else wedding adjacent, leave them in a comment down below. You can also always reach out to me on my website, which I think is here, maybe. Follow me on Instagram at Don't Forget the Champagne, and subscribe to this channel for more wedding planning content. I hope everyone has a good rest of their week and a good planning process, even amidst whatever is happening. And I will talk to you guys all next week. Bye. Are we in a new spot? Probably. Someone called me. How rude is that?